Hello, everybody. I would like to welcome you to the GLP webinar on co-production in the field of land system science. My name is Isabel Providoli. I work at the GLP IPO, the Global Land Program International Program Office, which is based at the Center for Development and Environment at the University of Bern. So this webinar is hosted by GLP and supported by the Swiss Development Corporation. I will be moderating this webinar jointly with my colleague Albrecht Ehrensberger, who is also working at the GLP IPO at the Center for Development and Environment of the University of Bern. But before we start, I would like to give the word to Lauren, who will share with us some housekeeping rules. So please, Lauren, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lauren Hertel. I will not be participating in the webinar today as a panelist, but I am working in the background for technical assistance or if you have any trouble at all during the webinar. You can reach me using the chat window. To find that, go to the GoToWebinar control panel, look for the chat panel, and feel free to send a message. You can send a message to me by sending it to the organizers using the drop-down, organizers only. If you have a question, we will be taking questions not via audio, but via the chat window for our panelists. If you have a question during the presentation or during the Q&A period, please use the chat window for that as well. Send all of your questions to the organizers and panelists only. Again, that would be any technical problems can come to the organizers, and any questions for our panelists can go to the organizers and panelists only. If you have any kind of technical problem during the webinar, I will be handling those completely via the chat. So please do use the chat window. Thanks, Isabel.
Thank you, Lauren. So I would like to start with a short introduction to this webinar series. And I hope you can see my slides. So as you know, GLP has different working groups. And so the co-production of sustainable land systems is one of those working groups. So this working group was launched in April 2018. And last year, we conducted a survey of interest to see how is the community feeling about such a working group. So more than 80 GLP members showed interest in such a working group. And currently, 44 members are registered on the website in this working group. So you're welcome. Also, newcomers are still welcome to join this working group. So the group is coordinated by 4 people. It's Jean-Christophe Castella, based at IRD Sirat. Then it's Albrecht Ehrensberger, so based at GLP IPO, and he will be co-moderating this webinar together with me. Then we have Narcisa Pricope. She is based at the University of North Carolina in the US, and she will be a speaker today, and myself. But let me come to the goals of this working group. So the main goal is to foster the adoption of co-production of social ecological knowledge within the GLP community. And we have 3 specific objectives. So the first one is really to establish a community of practice by facilitating the exchange of experience in co-production. So this is done through, for example, e-news, newsletter, or various learning events. Then the second objective is we provide methodological guidance for co-production approaches in land system science. So this can be done, among others, through webinars, like we are starting today, this series, or through synthesis, publications, and so on. And the third objective is actually to close the gap between land science and the development and land policy communities. So we want to create some type of brokerage and liaison platform. So important to mention, this working group is open to all GLP researchers. And the main idea is to build on experiences which are already available within the network, share them, and also support new members who might be new to the topic of co-production. So it's really a sharing. And so a first activity of this working group is this webinar series, which we are very excited to start or kick off today. So today we have the first webinar who is setting the stage, introducing the topic of co-production. But then we are planning to have 4 more webinars starting from September onwards. And there we really want to hear from the community, let them share their experiences they already have in co-production, share lessons learned, speak about challenges, opportunities, and so on. And out of all this exchange, we would like to have some follow-up products, like a synthesis of the webinar series in view of creating a common output, and that can still be defined by all of us. And we are also aiming at having sessions or workshops at the GLP Open Science meeting next year. But so let me come to the program of today. So we will be speaking about 3 topics. The first topic will address what is knowledge co-production and in which situation is it best applied, and what are the conceptual and practical issues related to it. So for this topic, we will have 2 speakers, Dr. Flurina Schneider from CDE, University of Bern, Switzerland, and Dr. Narcisa Pricope from the University of North Carolina, the US. Then we will move to the second topic, the adoption and implementation of co-production research in the field of land use science. There, our speaker will be Jana Zscheischler from the Leibniz Center for Agricultural Research in Germany. And topic 3 will actually be a panel discussion with the 3 speakers about possible co-production issues specifically linked to land systems. And as was already mentioned by Lauren, we would like to motivate you to share your questions, ideas through the chat box. But so now, without further delay, I would like to give the floor to our first speaker, to Dr. Flurina Schneider from CDE. So please, Flurina, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Everything works fine. So, as Isabel said, my name is Flurina Schneider. I work as a cluster head at the Center for Development and Environment of the University of Bern, with a research group on land resources. And I think they asked me to give this introductory presentation because for more than 10 years, maybe 15 years, I'm doing transdisciplinary research. I started with doing co-production, and later then I more and more started to also do meta-level research on different types of co-production approaches or transdisciplinary approaches, with the goal to find promising approaches for different situations. So let's see if I can, voila. Co-production, normally there are many different terms around, and so in my presentation I like to give you a little bit more clarity, and particular on one of them, which is one way of doing co-production. It's transdisciplinary research, and it's a term also which is quite differently defined in different communities and fields. For example, in the States, it's differently used often. So I will present you like the European way of looking at transdisciplinary research for co-production of knowledge. The term is quite well based, I would say, in the field of sustainability science. And I have here one quotation, which was published in the beginning, in 2001, in a very popular science article, and it said, transdisciplinarity or sustainability science seeks to understand the fundamental character of interactions between nature and society, and to encourage those interactions along more sustainable trajectories. And to do this, they say we need a new type of science. We need a place-based and integrated science to attain this goal of not only better understanding, but also enhancing change towards this, this more sustainable future. And one of the answers to this general call, in particularly also the German-speaking parts of Europe, was the development of transdisciplinary research. And I will start a little with saying when is this a suitable research approach, then more on how it can be defined and what are main conceptual approaches. The when is transdisciplinary research needed? So I would say very short, the one I just said before, when it is for solution finding, and it's not only for better understanding an issue, but when it's for searching solutions to specific societal problems or aiming to encourage transformations towards sustainability. And this particularly in cases with high complexity, high uncertainty, and high controversy. And I believe that actually in land system science, many of the problems we are looking at are characterized by these three characteristics. So for example, I like to quickly talk on one of my own research projects, where we try to find out, this is a landscape in Southeast Asia, and we try to find out how can this landscape be managed for sustainable provisioning of ecosystem services and poverty alleviation. And when tackling such a question, I mean, many sub-questions come in. For example, what land use change took place in past? How might this landscape change in the future? What are causes of this change? What are consequences for the different people, for nature, for ecosystem services, for human well-being? What at all means sustainability? So what might be a more sustainable future? So it's also not only about causes and consequences and systemic links, but also it's a very normative issue. What then is a better future, a more sustainable one? And you see, so on the one hand, there are very complex relationships between nature and people, but they can also be very contested because different people might have different understandings of causes, of consequences, of if this is sustainable or not sustainable, or how existing governance structures can be transformed to reach this more sustainable way of managing the land. So just again, one graph of our research, which I think quite well symbolizes the complexity of these relations. You see the change from one crop to a company-owned land and all the different relations and actors which are involved, the money flows and information flows, and people leaving the land, going to another country, and other people are coming in, working on the new field. So very complex situations, very contested situations, and also uncertain situations. It's very difficult in this situation to find the true truth. For example, because here it's a conflict area, so we heard many different stories. It's not always easy to know which one are more valuable than the others. I think this is a typical situation for a transdisciplinary research project, and very similar as many others. But then what at all is transdisciplinarity? And I've here one definition I often use, and it says that transdisciplinary research aims at transgressing boundaries between scientific disciplines and between science and practice in order to develop knowledge that can help to solve, mitigate, or prevent societal problems. So you see on later down on the slide different dimensions of transdisciplinarity. It's oriented towards a specific life world issue or real world issue, a societal problem. There is also a normative dimension involved. I called it here the common good. It's about, in the field of sustainability, it's about inter and intergenerational justice. Some people feel, well, that should not be part of a transdisciplinary definition. Of course, this can be seen differently. I think it's quite important because it also it shows what is different to applied research or contract research. Because when you work only for one contractor, one stakeholder, you might just use an applied research approach, for example, to develop a new seed or a new practice. But whenever it is about really the common good and finding better strategies for managing the land for the good of different stakeholders, then transdisciplinarity can be very valuable. Interdisciplinarity is an important issue for accommodating the complexity, so the different disciplines working together. Integration of not only different disciplinary perspectives, but also non-academics, stakeholders, societal actors, such as farmers or managers or business companies or investors. Production of system, target, and transformation knowledge. It's a concept which is often mentioned in relation to transdisciplinarity, meaning that on the one hand, we need a systems perspective, but we also need target knowledge, normative knowledge on what then is better than the things we observe, and transformation knowledge, so which is knowledge which helps to transform from the existing, maybe often not so sustainable or just situation, to a more sustainable future. And last but not least, it's often it's said that transdisciplinary research, it's important to see science as part of a social learning process, where science is one actor among others and all together are involved in joint learning towards land use transformations. This is a model which was introduced by Daniel Lang and colleagues already some years ago, and which is often referred. So you see on the left side societal practice, on the right side the scientific practice, and the idea is that these two fields are coming together in the transdisciplinary research process in the middle. And that this transdisciplinary research process has three phases: phase A, phase B, and phase C. Whereas the phase A, there it's really about starting the project, jointly framing the problem. What at all should we look at? What is a sustainability problem? And often it's very different what the scientists perceive as a scientific problem and what the societal actors perceive as a societal problem. So this means in the starting phase is very important in transdisciplinarity, to build a interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary team with all the different competences and to jointly frame the problem and the questions which should be addressed. Then the B phase is the actual phase of co-production of knowledge, where the different actors seek to jointly create new knowledge, and then see the reintegration of this knowledge into the two realms, the realm of science again, through enriching the scientific discourse, and on the other hand, the societal practice with what we would often call then implementation or contribution to societal learning processes, or to create knowledge which is important for the societal actors. Now I'm not sure how much time I've left. Can somebody?
Yeah, you have 1 more minute.
Okay, so I have 1 more minute, then I have enough time for the other slides. And because this one here is actually a very ideal type model of a transdisciplinary process. And while I think it's very valuable to have this as a model, we also found in our research that there are many different types of doing transdisciplinary research. And for example, in a project on sustainable water management, we investigated 60 projects where we found, you can see here, the 3 phases, A, B, C, and different intensities of interaction, from very low, just informing each other, to highly co-production with the 6. And there are different curves, how the projects worked. And we found that all of them can be fruitful. It's not the higher the better. What is often perceived that transdisciplinary means very, very high levels of interaction all the time. And we found that actually this is a good type for many questions, for sure, but it's not always needed. There are other good moments for different situations. And based on this background, we started more and more to think, okay, what we actually need to find are transdisciplinary approaches which are tailored to specific goals, to specific scientific and societal goals, to specific context conditions. So it's very different if to work in a communist country, Laos, or in a democratic country in Switzerland, or Madagascar, where the government doesn't exist at all. But also the epistemological assumptions of the researchers and other actors, of course, are very important, and what kind of knowledge should be developed. So with this, I would end this introductory talk, and I'm happy to answer any questions or to get your comments.
Super. This is Lauren Hertel again. I'm running the webinar in the background. This is just a reminder of a few housekeeping items. Everyone on the call is muted. You came in muted. We are taking questions, however, via the chat window. So within your GoToWebinar control panel, you can open up the chat panel. Please send any questions that you have via the chat to the organizers and panelists. That's on the drop-down menu under 2. And feel free to submit questions during our presenters' presentations, as well as afterwards during the question and answer period. We do have one of our panelists is collecting questions, and we'll start posing those as soon as we get to the Q&A period. I also just wanted to let everyone know that you will be receiving a link in an email after the webinar today that will include a link to a recording of this webinar, a video recording of the entire webinar, as well as handouts that we'll be passing out today, and the presenter's presentation slides. So just if you're wondering while these are going on, you will have access to all of these materials again after the webinar so that you can review them in your own time. Thanks so much. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass to our second presenter, who is Dr. Narcisa Pricope. Narcisa, I am passing to you right now.
Okay. Let's see, I'm waiting for, here we go. Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. My name is Narcisa Pricope, and I'm an associate professor at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. And I'm thrilled to talk to you a little bit today about knowledge co-production in socio-ecological systems. Thank you, Flurina, for a great introduction to transdisciplinary research. I have been fortunate to be trained as a PhD in a program at the University of Florida that was actually back in 2006 and before that advocating for
Narcisa,
yes?
I'm sorry, this is Lauren. Could you move a little bit closer to your microphone?
Yes, is this better?
Yes, that's better. Right next to the microphone. Perfect. Thank you.
Advocating for interdisciplinary research that emerges from stakeholder consultations and collaborative processes. And I have spent the last 12 years working in what was to become the world's largest transfrontier conservation area in Southern Africa, known as the Kavango-Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area, where I've strived to work on knowledge co-production even before this concept entered my vocabulary by researching socio-ecological system resilience in transfrontier co-managed systems here. And I have some, and apart from working in Southern Africa, I've also spent some time working on similar issues of co-production in Eastern Africa as part of the Nile Basin Initiative processes. Complex, wicked socio-environmental issues at the core of sustainability and land system science, or what my colleague Flurina was terming life-world problems or societal problems, require knowledge, experience, and practices that transgress disciplinary, organizational, hierarchical, and national boundaries for the most part. In the United States and in North America, the practice of conducting transdisciplinary research, even though not necessarily referred to as such, has long been a buzzword in academic circles, whereby socio-ecological systems collaborations have interdisciplinary objectives that aimed at understanding the complexity of systems. Yet, as the complexity of a system problem grows, and following participatory inclusive exercises with stakeholders and practitioners, researchers then often retreat back to their own disciplinary corners, compartmentalizing the research project into discrete components for later reassemblage and analysis. So here I show an example, a very simplified diagram that gives us a sense of the process of conducting effective interdisciplinary work that rests on the principles of shared learning, participatory methods, iterative engagement, integrative, multi-scalar exchanges, and approaches that should theoretically result in knowledge co-design and co-production that leverage the strengths of participants that represent different systems and scales. So here I'm showing a very simple loop that basically connects what Flurina was talking about, the practice community to the science community, but specifically as we deal with socio-ecological systems dynamics. However, in successfully completing such initiatives, despite the goodwill and transparent participation from all players, some major barriers remain that, when improperly accounted for, can hamper the long-term sustainability of these trans and interdisciplinary initiatives. So I'd like to spend just a couple minutes discussing some of these barriers and proposing some new ways forward towards transformational knowledge production or co-production, and especially as that applies to complex transboundary systems. So as I said, this simplified rendering here on my left is based on the basic idea behind Lang et al.'s 2012 work, but a lot of this, what should be an iterative feedback type of process, can come against barriers that, such as the fundamental challenge of engaging with cross-scale and cross-sector networks for learning and action. And I would like to, for the duration of my presentation, really zoom in on the idea of these cross-scalar and cross-sector or cross-level types of interactions, where, based on my experience and the colleagues that I've worked with, there remains a disconnect in linking sort of the practice and the science community specifically, or addressing the barriers to cooperation on complex problem solving, or accounting or managing trust issues and power imbalances, as well as accounting for sources of resilience and sources of strong resilience, or even at times backlash in complex problem situations. So all of these types of barriers pose powerful stumbling blocks, essentially, in the operation of what is intended to be a cyclic, iterative, and what I'll be proposing in just a second should be an adaptive process, and essentially what Flurina was talking about. So
this is Lauren again. Sorry, could you lean a little bit closer to your mic again? We're losing your sound a little bit.
I am very close to you.
Are you?
Okay. Yes. Is this a little bit better or not so much?
Much better.
Okay. So here in this figure, I'm showing an example of a current research project that I'm undertaking with colleagues in the Kavango Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area in Southern Africa, the largest world's cross-boundary managed land area between 5 different countries. And as I said, we've worked here for many years. And similar to the project that Flurina described in her presentation, we are trying to understand the relationship, essentially the relationship between livelihood sustainability, development, and conservation. And in doing so, we have been engaging actively at multi-scales. So starting at the household level, we're conducting work at the household level, trying to understand how people make decisions, how their decisions are affecting the environment, and how the environment is affecting their decision making. We're also working at multiple levels, again, from the household to the community to regional to country levels. And since this is a transfrontier area, we're working at basically an international level where the cooperation and the communication between the different countries and the different stakeholders nested within these is going to be key. And of course, there are multi-actor collaborations, and the ultimate goal here is to be able to undertake multi-scalar types of measurements and approaches and solving problems that are complex, that span geographical scales and jurisdictional boundaries, and in doing so, to take an integrative systems-based and network-based approach that can connect effectively between these multiple scales and actors, so as to find the most appropriate fit for a problem, for a project, for an actor to be engaged in, either socially or ecologically, but oftentimes together, because in sustainability science, we're talking about these socio-ecological systems. Oops, sorry, I went the wrong way. So I would like to, so while the need for these types of collaborative multi-scalar interventions has been well articulated in development and governance work in socio-ecological systems, less attention has been given to how specifically academics and I think the biggest thing that I'll try to argue here today is that to some extent, the way that even though we're talking about knowledge co-production, a lot of times the engagement oftentimes comes from the academic side. It goes out towards the practice community, and that's not always the case. But when the academic side of a socio-ecological system reaches out, oftentimes there are strong barriers and still strong challenges in applying these principles to their own research, to where taking a systems approach to their analytical framework and methods in order to ensure broader integration of their findings for better research uptake and the ultimate goal of engaging in effective knowledge co-production lies. So again, even though we talk a lot about approaching systems dynamics from an SES perspective, where do we still have problems? Where do we still have to do work to really fully embrace knowledge co-production to create truly transdisciplinary work? So what I'll say is that a lot of times when a project is started, how we structure the research design so that the analytical approaches of different disciplines and different actors can be iteratively engaged engaged so at multiple scales. In practical terms, sometimes academics that work at the SES interface wrestle with multiple research management challenges, including framing research questions and approaches clearly and with terminology that's common to multiple disciplines. This often requires resolving disparate methodological approaches to produce complementary information, right? Because typically a lot of project goals require some sort of populating a statistical or a process-based model that inherently involves loss of information. And very importantly, so the process of engaging in this co-production and co-design requires incorporating multiple scales and levels of organization into the data collection itself and into the research design at the very sort of bottom of the scale, which must be specific to the scales at which the human and the biophysical processes interact to affect system behavior. So the idea is that we need to balance these trade-offs in the context of limited project budgets and timelines. And we are finding this, especially, we are not as fortunate, I would say, in North America as you are in Europe, to have agencies explicitly requiring and requesting co-production even beyond sort of boilerplate broader impacts that are required, right? So a lot of times those broader impacts, the impacts of our research to society, come sort of later. But what I'd like to argue for here is that what we need to be, sorry, going the wrong way. What we need to be working with and starting at, as land system scientists, as socio-ecological systems scientists, is really begin knowledge co-production at the co-design, at the research design, and I'd like to call it the research co-design phase, right? Where we can.
Isabel, could you then just slowly come to an end, please?
Yes, I am just making my final point here, what is really necessary to make transdisciplinary work, research work, is starting with the pilot work and incorporating the different scales, that the human scales and the natural scales, and to utilize multiple multi-level entry points or points of contact and direct engagement within a system, but relative to the important spatio-temporal scales under investigation. And my final point is that the adaptive management of research co-design conducted in partnership across the research components would allow for better integration and more informed outcomes. Thank you. Hello?
Thank you very much. I think, Lauren, you carry on, right?
Yep. So I believe Albie is going to explain, but next we have a poll that we'd like to run to get the audience's reactions to our first two presentations. Albie, would you like to explain, and I'll launch the poll?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Albrecht Ehrensberger, and I will try to guide you a little bit through the discussion of this webinar. And to start with, before we come to the questions to our first two speakers, we would like to get your views, your perceptions on what the main contribution of transdisciplinarity and co-production could be for land system science. So you should all now see the quick poll on your screens, and I would ask you to select one option. There is no correct answer. Just go by your gut feeling, select the one that you think is the most important or the most relevant contribution of co-production for land system science. And we will use the results of this quick poll to kickstart the discussion in topic 3. So I give you a minute to read through these 5 options that you have that you can select from before we move on with questions to our first two speakers.
And while that poll is in progress, I just want to check, Albie, can you see the questions panel in GoToWebinar?
I can see it, but it is all squashed in one little window.
You can open it up by clicking the icon on the right side of it, which is a little box with an arrow, and that will open it up for you so that you can see questions as they're coming in.
Got it.
We have great response levels coming into the poll.
Excellent.
Already 81% of our attendees have already voted. So we'll be closing that in just a few seconds. And then everyone will get to see the results.
Now, Lauren, maybe you can keep the results to yourself and show them when we start with topic 3.
Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll.
Okay, I have a couple of questions here. Unfortunately, they didn't trickle in slowly. They all came in the last 30 seconds. So I didn't get time to kind of order them and bring them to you in a nice and concise way. I would just pick one or two randomly. Someone is saying, it was a nice introductory presentation, probably referring to Flurina. I wanted to know how transdisciplinary approach may help in improving agriculture sector such that it can extend its contribution in meeting more numbers of sustainable development goals. Flurina, was that too fast, or can you maybe try to bounce on that one?
I mean, it's a big question, and I would say it could be a very good question to explore with a transdisciplinary approach, because when it is to look at how can agriculture contribute to different types of sustainable development goals. So I assume it's not only food production, probably, but maybe also biodiversity protection or income generation, or different types of goals which could be addressed through agriculture. And in agriculture, there are, on the one hand, these are quite complex systems. You know, how does agricultural production link to food production, to biodiversity protection, to all these different types of things? Just understanding is quite complex. On the other hand, there are many different actors involved, and quite often they have very different perspectives. For example, conservation people, farmers, agribusiness actors. They all have quite different ideas about what might be good contributions of agriculture to sustainability and what is important or not. And to take, to bring these different type of actors together, their different types of knowledge, the more maybe scientific knowledge about the causal linkers, the systemic perspective, and then to try together to figure out what could be what might be key features of an agriculture which addresses more sustainable development goals than it does maybe today.
Thank you very much, Flurina. Maybe a related question. Someone is asking whether modelers and biophysical researchers can also engage in knowledge co-production with communities. I don't know if that one goes only to you or also to Narcisa.
I'm happy to potentially take that, because that was definitely on my slides. And the project that I was specifically referring to, we have a very strong presence of modelers and biophysical researchers, and they bring a very important perspective, and they definitely, I think, should be important players in knowledge co-production and transdisciplinary work, for sure.
Yeah, my answer would go in the same direction, and even saying that at least in Switzerland and Europe, the transdisciplinary movement was strongly founded even by natural scientists, because they started to realize that they need to collaborate with social scientists, they need to work with practitioners to make their research more valuable, to get better understandings of different phenomena. So in any case, yes.
Someone is also asking how you deal with conflicting interests, for example, in a densely populated country or area where different interests might be very conflictual. How do you approach such a situation in co-production and transdisciplinarity? Any of you?
Okay. I mean, this is a very typical situation, that there are different interests, and I distinguish between different levels of differences. So there might be just different perspectives, so that, I mean, for example, a farmer might see soil protection differently than a soil specialist. Yeah, there's not really a conflict, but just different perspectives. But to not negotiate this perspective, or to not induce learning between these two actors, might hamper implementation of conservation agricultural practices, for example. And then there is all the range to really more and more conflictive situations, such as, for example, now in Myanmar, where we are working in a post-conflict area with a civil war and the military still having a big say and being involved in many of the land use conflicts. And of course, in such a situation, or in the two situations, we have to work differently with conflict. So in the first one, we might opt for example, for a round table or for a learning process where we try to bring together different perspectives, the actor with the different perspectives, to learn from each other, to try to get a joint understanding. And in the other case, I mean, we cannot bring the actors together because they might just kill each other at the moment. So when the conflict is really escalated, of course, then it's not about learning in this sense, then it's more about indirect interventions, maybe first trying to strengthen the actors which are the victims, and yeah, trying to work in this way around.
Thank you very much. I think we are slowly coming to the end of our time for the first Q&A session. There are many other questions. I would like to ask those who are posting questions in the chat window to please be as brief as possible, because the chat window of GoToWebinar is not that easy to decipher. And if possible, also indicate to whom your question goes, to which one of the speakers. Isabel, can I pass back to you? I think my time is up.
Yes, thank you very much.
Maybe, sorry, before I give back to you, I would like to tell those whose questions have not been taken up so far not to be frustrated. We will go systematically through all your questions together with the speakers, and we will find some way to provide the answers to you in written form, maybe on the website.
Okay, good. Thanks a lot. So now let's move to the second topic of today. It's the adoption and implementation of co-production research in the field of land use science. And there I would like to invite our next speaker, Dr. Jana Zscheischler from the Leibniz Center for Agricultural Research. And so Jana, please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Jana Zscheischler from the Leibniz Center for Agricultural Landscape Research in Germany. And in the next 10 minutes, I will present you some insights from a study we did on transdisciplinary research practice. But before, some words on my person. I have a background in social sciences and in environmental sciences, and I wrote my doctoral thesis on transdisciplinarity in the specific field of land use science. And in my research focus, I focus currently on innovation processes for sustainable land management and on transdisciplinarity, as well as on methods for an integrative or integrated land systems perspectives. Yeah, but coming now to my presentation. Here I would like to present you key results from a comparative case study we did. And this study deals with the adoption and implementation of transdisciplinary research in the specific field of land use science. So here I just wanted to let you know where I'm currently in the moment. I'm at the south and located here in northeastern Germany, close to Berlin. Just a few words about the motivation of our study. Transdisciplinary research has become a widespread research approach in sustainability science and is currently increasingly promoted by research programs as well as funding agencies. So it is discussed, as we already heard, as a very promising approach to address complex real-world problems and to design strategies and solutions for sustainable development. But we argue that this success and this currently observable upscaling process also places transdisciplinary research in a kind of critical state, as it also risks a type of rhetorical mainstreaming. This observation is underlined by some scholars who observe that transdisciplinary research is rarely optimally realized. And in addition, we also found that there actually is a knowledge gap on information on the quality and on the true performance of transdisciplinary research. So our study started from the hypothesis that there is a gap between the expert-driven theoretical discourse on transdisciplinary research on the one hand, and its real-world practice by a broader science practice community on the other hand. And this hypothesis we developed from a literature review we did on about 300 papers dealing with issues of land use. And we found there a gap between theory and practice. But this hypothesis is also supported by observations we did in the community and among researchers we know from our field. So the aim of the study was to examine in how far this hypothesis holds true or not. And in this context, we said, okay, it's important to find answers on the following two questions. First, how is the challenging approach of transdisciplinary research currently adopted in research practice? And second, of course, we wanted also to know which factors influence this adoption of transdisciplinary research. So we conducted a comparative case study investigating 13 transdisciplinary research projects, and these projects were all funded by the same German funding program, where applying the transdisciplinary research approach was a prerequisite for funding. And we conducted their interviews with researchers and with coordinators. We also took part in meetings, in workshops and conferences of these projects. We also had access to their proposals and documents and reports and so on. We applied two analytical concepts to frame our study. For the first question, how transdisciplinary research is applied, we used the widely acknowledged ideal type of a three-phase transdisciplinary research process after Lang, which already was introduced by Flurina. And sorry, I forgot to show you. Here it is. And we applied this concept to find out in how far this ideal type actually differs from the real type, which we can observe in the projects. And we additionally selected three categories in the according principles. First, the collaborative problem framing and co-designing in the initial stage of a project. Second, we took a look at the interdisciplinarity in the projects. And third, we wanted to get knowledge about the science practice collaboration and the implementation of this. And the second concept we applied was the social innovation concept. As we said, we wanted to know also about the factors that influence the adoption of transdisciplinary research. So we said transdisciplinary research can be regarded as a type of social innovation in the academic system, as it is still quite new, and it needs a change of the scientific practices of the scientists. Thus, we had a look at relevant factors that we thought would be important for the adoption, so such as knowledge on the innovation, the willingness to adopt transdisciplinary research concept, and the compatibility with the academic structures. So, okay, here we go with the results. This table tries to display the results. It shows different cases on the right side. I selected 10 out of 13 projects. And on the left side, you can see the category system that was developed deductively and inductively, like for the collaborative project development phase at the beginning, joint problem identification, joint formulation of objectives, and so on. And then we assessed, based on the qualitative analysis of our material, how these let's say, indicators were applied or implemented in the projects. So in the columns on the right side, you see the pluses and minuses. A plus means that the indicator was applied in the project. A minus means that we could not find it was applied. And the brackets say that it was rather applied or rather not. And some fields are also empty, meaning that we had not sufficient information to evaluate this indicator. Just to highlight some key results. First, and in general, you see that there is a broad variation in adopting transdisciplinary research, meaning the quality and the degrees to which the indicators, let's say, were evaluated. But looking at the collaborative project development indicators, you see that there were only few projects that strived to achieve a real co-design process at the initial stage. And we heard before in the presentations that this is a very critical stage of the project and for the project success then. Looking at the interdisciplinarity, we saw that interdisciplinary collaboration exhibited a rather or prevailing additive character in the projects, while the integration of conceptual frameworks and theory from different disciplines was frequently not strategically really planned or managed. And we also found a dominance of natural, scientific, technological disciplines in many cases. So often social scientists were regarded, let's say, as a service discipline. And regarding the practice and science collaboration, we found that only in a minority of projects, science-practice collaboration had a central role and was designed as a process with equal footing, and that most projects really struggled to achieve balanced benefits between practical outcomes and scientific excellence, let's say. So on the next slides, I come to the results regarding to the influencing factors for adopting transdisciplinary, the concept of transdisciplinarity.
Sorry,
And
just to let you know, you have about 1 minute left. Okay,
I will hurry. So just to let you know, we found that it was as an explaining factor that many coordinators and researchers had not sufficient or only had a vague understanding about the concept of transdisciplinarity. However, we found that in general there is a very positive attitude towards the concept of transdisciplinarity. And we found that many researchers perceived academic structures as not compatible with transdisciplinarity. So coming back to our hypothesis that there is a gap between the theoretically discussed ideal type of transdisciplinarity and the practice, we have to say, yes, our results support this hypothesis. Practice of transdisciplinary research differs significantly from the proposed ideal type, and there's a very broad variety in adopting transdisciplinarity. This is my last slide, and here I just wanted to sum up the main challenges we found. We see that there is a lack of sufficient knowledge of the transdisciplinary research concept. This also goes back from our point of view on communication deficits between different communities. There is a strong need for adjusted funding conditions to really implement a real transdisciplinary research process. And in general, we have seen that academic structures are really incompatible with this approach. If you want to know more about the study, you can find this in this article. But yeah, for the moment, I thank you very much for your attention.
Am I taking over?
Yep, and in the meantime, Jana, would you keep that last slide up since you're still sharing your screen? You'll keep that up through the Q&A and the poll.
Okay, thank you very much, Jana. I think we have a second poll coming up, Lauren. Again, you will be shown a question and 4 possible answers, and we would like you to pick one of them. Again, it's gut feeling and no correct answer. we will again use the results of this poll to animate the discussion at the end. Lauren, are answers trickling in?
They absolutely are. We have 75% of our attendees have already voted. I'll be closing it in just a little bit here.
Okay.
In the meantime, just a reminder, if you have a question for our panelists, you can use the chat window. A few people had trouble finding that. That's in the GoToWebinar control panel. There's a very small gray bar that says chat. If you click the small arrow next to the word chat, it will drop down and give you a chance to send messages. If you would send your messages to the organizers and panelists only, that's in the drop down on the to part of the chat window, and that way we can make sure that we get to your questions. I will say up front, we have more questions than we have time for, but we will keep track of those and find a way to get answers for some of the questions we don't have time for today. All right, looks like we have almost everyone who has voted. I'll go ahead and close the poll.
Thank you very much. And before I take a few questions that came in, I would like to ask Flurina and Narcisa if they want to quickly react on Jana's presentation.
Yes, I'm happy to. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. And somehow, I think it's very in line with many of our own findings regarding this distinction between the more ideal type idea of transdisciplinary and what then is really implemented in reality. And I have two questions, one more methodological and the other one a more practical. So the methodological one is when you were rating the indicators, to what extent they did. Maybe it was you said it, but I missed it. Did you do interviews so could you speak with the people about all of these issues, or were you dependent on, let's say, written documents, papers, and proposals? And the other question was when you said, okay, there is a gap between the ideal and the real. Is this a problem? So do you feel that the projects would have been whatever, better, more relevant, better knowledge, whatever, with a better, a more ideal type TD, or was it actually an adapted approach they have chosen?
So coming to your first question, yeah, we conducted interviews with researchers and with coordinators. And I don't know if it's already answered. And we talked about all these issues, but there were also issues coming up. So we applied a deductive, inductive approach. Yeah. And coming to your second question, if this gap might be a problem, I would say yes. On the one hand, you can always argue, okay, it is an ideal type. So the ideal type will always differ from the real type. Okay, yes, that's true. But what we observed are really severe differences, and so it's only, yeah, rhetorical mainstreaming, as I said, and it's only like labeling. And I think it's important that when we label something with transdisciplinarity, that there's also transdisciplinarity in, and maybe this is already open to the discussion. And also a point that I observed from your presentation is it a problem that there is a kind of plurality of transdisciplinarity, or does this also mean that there's maybe a gap in theory and we need maybe more theoretical or more precise concepts, and maybe also a typology of transdisciplinarity? Did I answer? Okay.
Okay, I can maybe bounce back on that one, because there's one question that asks something a little slightly different. They say, the person is saying that actually we have the theory, we have good concepts, but do we have best practices, and do we have success stories? Do we have examples where we have important knowledge breakthroughs through using this approach?
Yeah, I know. I discussed this with many colleagues. There are colleagues that really apply very challenging transdisciplinary processes, and they are really engaged with that, and they really mean that, and they do a lot of effort. But there are also, and when we talk about specific challenges for the land use science community, then I think there's still a broad scientific community where the concept did not sufficiently was transferred to, or the knowledge is not sufficient on it. So we need to communicate it better, because at the moment, you know, we have so many transdisciplinary research projects, but they do not all have the quality maybe we would like to have them.
Let me take another provocative question. Someone is saying that we have heard many complex words, we have seen complex graphs, everything looks very complicated. But how do we make this whole TD and co-production story more fun and more attractive for partners to be happy to take part in it?
Is this only a question to me, or?
I think it's to everyone.
Okay.
Whoever feels ready to answer it.
So I start. I think it's a very critical question, because and there is some trade-off in it. Yeah? On the one hand, I'm teaching transdisciplinarity to PhDs, to other students, and it's always a question. So how much we say this is really something like any other scientific method, which must be learned, and it's challenging. There are many challenges involved, and we have to get the competences and the skills and the concepts to describe it and to work on it. Or then to say, well, but that's all much too complicated, and we have to go just in very easy way with, that it's also fun, that it looks fun. I mean, I don't know many scientific methods which just look fun, you know, for a practitioner. So somehow this must be different, I agree, for transdisciplinarity, because it's exactly of allowing to link to link science and practice. But it's really, I'm a bit torn in between to say on the one hand, it's also something which everybody can do, and also step by step learn and start with a small piece, and maybe it's not, and that's also why my question come, do we measure ourselves on the ideal time, or we just say, let's go in the next project and make one step. Let's just talk more to practitioners. And this is far from the ideal type TD, but it's a good step forward. But then, of course, there are many challenges probably arise, which could have been prevented when applying some more of the basic principles and quality criteria of TD.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there's one quite interesting question here, and it relates to some of the things that have been said. For example, Narcisa's reference to the different scales. Someone is asking how you would go about transdisciplinarity and co-production in, let's say, a situation of a least developed country, which is under a lot of external pressure, where you have actors who are distant actors, for example, and who have an influence and exert some pressure on that area through investments, for example. How do you conduct co-production in such a setting where the actors are not all in one location, but they are spread all over the world?
That's a very good question, and it is exactly the type of setting that I was pulling from in my discussion, where the project that I was referring to is happening. There's a lot of, specifically, a very strong Chinese influence that is in the background. You don't see it, you don't know it's there. I think perhaps it's a question, it's a matter of choosing, or not choosing, but working with the actors that you directly can work with the actors that you can work with at the different scales where the project may need to be pulling or fitting objectives into. But I'm not sure. I think that's definitely still open for debate, and with the invisible distal actors that may have competing interests, I think that's definitely going to be something to still work on and look into. I couldn't say that I have the answer to that one. It's a good question.
Does anyone of the other speakers want to complement this?
Yeah, I think it's a very, very critical question, particularly for the land system community, because this is the case in many of our examples, and also in, we call it telecoupling. So when different type of systems are connected, and of course then also different actors are connected or not connected. And in our, we have a project currently we conduct in different countries, low development countries, Myanmar, Madagascar, Laos, where we exactly try to figure out these questions. And I would say we have no best answer at the moment. We are exploring how can we go on. Often what we try in transdisciplinary project is to really talk to these people face to face, because we know that is very important, and bring together the different actors on a table. But in such situations, this is not possible. So what can we do then? And so, for example, one approach we started to experiment with is video, to work with video. I have a PhD student going to the very remote villages, making video statements with people, bringing these statements then to other stakeholders which meet at the national level or a more intermediate level, and try through this means to somehow connect these people, which, I mean, these are places where no internet connections exist, so we cannot just make a webinar or a phone call. But I'm very happy if there are other, to hear if you are, the panelists or also other participants have good experience with these questions, to have answers to these questions.
Well, in the meantime, a lot of questions have trickled in, and I'm already apologizing to all those whose questions will not be asked today. As I mentioned before, we will find a way to go through all of them and send you responses through other means than orally. And there are also some questions that are advices to our webinar. There's one question, for example, or one remark saying that a typical case presentation would help to better visualize or understand what this is all about. It is true that maybe this session is a little bit theoretical, but we will take this as an advice for our next sessions, and maybe feature some really concrete examples of projects and the experiences that were gathered there. I think I have 2 minutes left to take maybe 1 or 2 short questions. Somebody is asking, what would be your one advice to someone starting with transdisciplinarity? Short question, short answer, please. Who has a good tip or trick or advice?
Start at the research design phase and incorporate any transdisciplinary objectives straight from the beginning, even especially do pilot work that helps with that knowledge co-production and co-design from the beginning.
Thank you. Then there's one question to Jana. Can transdisciplinarity help solve land use conflicts?
Yeah, I'm quite convinced that it can help. It must, maybe not always, but it can help. And we already observed that in projects, that it at least it can improve the mutual understanding and the perspectives of other actor groups and so on. Yeah, and increase the mutual understanding. Mm-hmm.
Then there was one other person saying or asking if conflicts are serious, so we remain with the topic of conflicts. If conflicts are serious, is political intervention the only solution?
What does it mean?
you to interpret. Is there, well, I guess that the meaning of that question is there a limit, an upper limit to how far transdisciplinarity can go? And is there a threshold beyond which top-down is the only way?
I mean, yes, I mean, for sure. Transdisciplinarity is always about knowledge, basically, and there are situations which are not at all about knowledge. And so this might be one example where other types of mediation approaches, conflict resolution, different types of approaches are needed. And,
okay.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. I think we have exhausted the time for the second Q&A session, and we are moving on with topic 3. Isabel, are you introducing that topic, or do we go straight ahead with the poll results?
Well, I can maybe just read it out that everybody still remembers what was topic 3 about. It's possible co-production issues, specifically linked to land system. But so, Albi,
okay.
please.
Well, Lauren, surprise us with the results, please.
Can you also
okay, so you should all see now on your screens the results for the first question. What is the most important contribution of co-production in land system science? And I think the winner is legitimacy.
Is that showing up big enough for you, Albi, or shall I expand it?
No, it's okay.
Okay, good.
I can see that legitimacy, integrating different perspectives, got 36% of the votes. And in second position, we have the relevance, to orient the project or the activity towards life world issues with 22%. And then with 20%, we have the third option, the overview, helping to deal with complex realities, not to forget something in a complex system. And then being part of a social learning process with 14%, and providing direction, orientation towards the common good with 7%. Interesting. Who would like to comment on that? Speakers.
I would be happy to make a comment on that, because I think a lot of what I was trying to communicate was the fact that even at the design stage of a project, the hardest, one of the most difficult aspects appears to be being able to integrate disciplines and perspectives, epistemologies even between and among disciplines, let alone between science and practice community. So if we can make that kind of a contribution, I think we'd be happy.
Okay. Someone else?
I find it quite interesting that the legitimacy aspect got most votes. I somehow hypothesized it might be more dealing with complex realities, so the more the complexity question. So I was a little surprised. On the other hand, I mean, I feel that these things, to say which one of them is the most important, that's not so easy, because somehow they very much relate to each other. And I'm not sure what I would have voted for.
I think nobody was sure. That is the fun. Okay, any other votes on or comments on the results of this poll, or maybe just to develop a little bit one of these options? Jana, we haven't heard you on that.
Yeah, my problem is that I cannot see this poll on my screen.
Okay.
So, and I'm not sure if you all can still see my screen. So I'm a little bit afraid to change too much here.
So this is Lauren. You can't see it because you are still sharing your screen. You're welcome to go ahead and turn off screen sharing. I'll make myself the presenter. Give me just a moment. Or actually, you know what, Isabel, can we just go back to your screen? Are you ready? Because you'll be the next person showing your presentation. Would that be okay, Isabel? And you're muted, just so you know. Abby, did you want to go ahead and go on to the next poll?
Yes, sure. Okay. So the second poll question was, what is most challenging when using co-production approaches in land system science? And there seems to be an advantage towards multiple scales. The question was raised about telecoupling and the difficulty of integrating stakeholders at different scales and in different locations. So I think this is a bit reflecting this predominance of the multiple scales as being an important challenge towards conducting co-production and transdisciplinary approaches. Then we have two in second position, the question of the compromise, which is difficult to reach when you have one location. When talking about land systems, you have to make a selection between different options, but you have only one location where you can implement these options, but you might have different and conflicting priorities, making it hard for a solution to be found. The tenure is also seen as something important and relevant in terms of a challenge. Land and being a sensitive resource and being often at the crossroads of different power struggles, land tenure plays an important role or is an important challenge when conducting these kind of co-production exercises. And the last one is who's responsible. So we have here the question of having administrative boundaries or areas of jurisdiction not overlapping exactly with problem area, and a gray zone or a blurriness existing pertaining to who is responsible for attaining a certain goal. Any comments on that from the panelists?
It's not easy to comment here. I mean, but visible that all of them seem to be very challenging for some of the people, and yeah, when I think about my own research, I think I already I had challenges in all this in all these fields. So maybe I'm a little surprised that the first one is very high. So the question, which stakeholders to include? Because I have the impression there are many tools around we can use. So stakeholder analysis, for example, to identify the most important stakeholders or the most important stakeholder groups, or then the specific actors, and to decide on this issue. Whereas the other questions, these are really questions of, let's say, when going to the field, this is most of the time a challenge, and there is no easy solution. There's one location, conflicting priorities. That's just quite often the case, and if the priorities are very different, it's very challenging. Funnily, the last one, the tenure, I first spontaneously I understood it in a different way around. I was thinking in scientific tenure and not land tenure, in more career perspective.
Okay. Good. If there are no more comments on this poll, I'm maybe going to read one or two more questions to our panelists. There is one, for example, asking on how transdisciplinarity approaches can seriously include different perspectives on the natural world and the land, for example, indigenous and local knowledge, into the assessment of social ecological systems. And what are the main challenges in this inclusion? The question is addressed to all of you.
If I may start here, I just have one. I would like to add one thing that we have found useful in many of the locations was the idea of conducting environmental history interviews with typically selected elders in communities that give us a really good sense from that traditional knowledge perspective, knowledge-based, and then the idea beyond that to get to know the system and to ask sort of the same questions at multiple levels, the hydrosphere, the vegetation, the atmosphere, and then also to use different types of entry points, rapid field assessments while you're in the field, before you go to the field, different satellite imagery, but really to look at different types of data that are services that give us the ability to zoom in on a study area, such as the NASA appears, for example, and it allows us to pull time series and trajectories very quickly to get a sense of the biophysical conditions on the ground before you even get to the field.
Thank you. There's one question or comment that has just come in. Somebody is saying that time was not recorded as a challenge to co-production and transdisciplinarity. Maybe I can add to that. Yes, I mean, could one say that co-production is something that is slow and potentially expensive? What are the costs of co-production in terms of time and additional effort?
I mean, it is often said that transdisciplinary or co-production needs time, and I mean, of course, there is no objection towards this, but at the same time, it's often said it needs more time than just doing research, and I would say yes, somehow, but it very much depends on the goal. So, what kind of goal you want to achieve, or we want to achieve? And when we do transdisciplinary research, normally we don't achieve the same goal as when we do traditional forms of research, and the two take time. So to say it needs more time, it's only an issue somehow when we say you have a PhD of 3 years, or you have then a postdoc, and what can you do within this time? And you think, okay, you could map so many areas, and now you have, in addition to do all this stakeholder stuff and this interdisciplinary work, but when you frame the project from the very beginning as a transdisciplinary project, you also look that it does not overload a PhD. So I think that from my perspective, time is an issue we have to consider, because it takes time to work in a transdisciplinary way. But without doing it, we just don't achieve the goals we want. And that's why it's not more time in a sense. So it's just the right amount of time needed for this activity.
Yeah, but I think here Flurina really points at an important issue to say, yeah, it needs more time. And but something I frequently observed is that, yeah, regarding to this, it's not very good for junior researchers to be dependent with their qualification works in such transdisciplinary research projects, isn't it? So I thought maybe you would react on it.
Does the question go back to Flurina?
Yes, I'm thinking what to say. We had last week we had a big meeting on impacts of transdisciplinarity, and we exactly discussed this question: should the young researchers be involved in transdisciplinarity or not? And some people argued we need to create sort of protection spaces for the young researchers within bigger transdisciplinary projects, that they are not overloaded, because first they have to learn all the scientific techniques and methods and ways of thinking. So don't overload them with also then all the transdisciplinary and practice orientation. And on the other hand, there were arguments and people saying, well, but when we just, when this is not part of the curricula and of the education of young researchers, so it's becoming more and more difficult, because once you are trained and you are disciplined in your discipline, it's a much bigger step to work again in a transdisciplinary mode. And so I would say it needs careful consideration how to deal with it, but there might be different options, and I would not go just for one and just take the juniors out. I think when it's, for example, when you have a supervisor who is very favorable and which supports you in doing transdisciplinary research, you can advance quite well. Whereas when you constantly have to defend your work in front of your supervisor and he only measures you against his disciplinary vision, then of course it might be too challenging. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have to close the discussion around here. I would like to thank all the participants who have sent their questions, very interesting questions, and some of them unfortunately could not be answered now, but they will be answered in written format at a later stage. And with that, I would like to give back to Isabel for the closing.
Yeah, thank you. Just 1 second. Okay, I hope my screen is visible. So very exciting discussions, and I'm sorry that we, in a way, had to cut them. I'm sure the discussion could have continued much longer, but we are actually coming to an end of this first webinar, and I would like to thank to the 3 speakers which we had, and also to the audience, which was very actively asking questions. And as Albi or Albrecht already mentioned, we will make sure that your questions can, in a way or the other, be answered. So this first webinar was really setting the stage. It was an introductory webinar. That's why we were also focusing a little bit on the theory side. But so the upcoming webinars, there we would really like to dive more into practice, sharing examples, lessons learned, which would then already address some of the questions which you had. But so coming to the closing and also a little bit the outlook, we would like to invite you to do a survey. And I hope some of my colleagues will post the survey link into the chat box, but we will also share it by email later on. But so the survey is basically to know a little bit more about you. But then we also have a section where we have a series of statements on which we would love to get your views. And then the third part of the survey, there we would like to hear your feedback on this first session, but then also especially wishes for the next ones. Because we would really like also in a way to co-design the upcoming webinars together with you, that we really address topics which are of interest for you. And so the handouts and the PowerPoints will also be available and shared through our website, but you will also get email. And I would still, again, like to welcome that please join the co-production working group on the GLP website. You just have to click the link, I would like to join this working group. And if you have further questions, remarks, please don't hesitate to contact me. So again, a big thank you. It was really very exciting to have this first webinar with all of you. So thank you very much and goodbye.